Welcome to another session of Torah study. The portion this week is Chayei Sarah, found in the Chumash, the Eitz Chaim, on page 127, or whatever edition of Chumash you're using. It's chapter 23 of Genesis. So I always find it interesting that we're introduced at. Let me do the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I find it interesting when the page number somehow is connected to the Torah portion, where we're told in the very first verse of the portion on page 127 that Sarah was 127 years old when she died. So it's just funny how that worked out, that the beginning of the portion is on page 127. So this week I don't want to look at the beginning of the portion. I'd rather look near the end of the fifth aliyah on page 138. What is chapter 24, beginning with verse 62. 24:62, and again, I'm keeping everybody on mute, unless you want to interrupt with a question or a comment. So what happens until this point is that Sarah dies, Abraham buys a burial plot for her and buries her. Then all of chapter 24 is about finding a wife for Isaac. And this chapter, which is 67 sentences long, describes that process, how Abraham commissions his servant Eliezer, the head of his household, to go to the land where Abraham and Sarah came from, where they still have relatives, to find a wife there for Isaac. And at another time, we can talk about that section, about why a woman found in the neighborhood in the land of Israel is not suitable, but rather it had to be a family member from the home country. Anyway, Eliezer goes, meets Rebecca, is struck by her personality and her beauty, and convinces her and her family to come back with him to marry Isaac. And that's where I want to look at the last 5 sentences of chapter 24, where Isaac and Rebecca meet. So I want to look at this, and what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen in a little bit to share some comments about a couple of lines here. So, all right, so verse 61 tells us that Rebecca and her maidservants are traveling with Eliezer. So verse 62. V'yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i v'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. Now, so this means Isaac just came back. So this phrase, ba mibo, is an interesting phrase, because it could have just said, V'yitzchak ba mi be'er lachai ro'i. So the Hebrew, when it says ba mi bo, it doesn't mean just came back. It means he was in the process of coming from from the well that is known as Chayei, and he is dwelling in the land of the Negev. Okay, now I want to spend a moment about this because this is the first time we're seeing Isaac in this portion. And if you don't mind unmuting yourself, if you have an answer to this question, where did we see Isaac before verse 62? When was the last time? What was happening the last time we met Isaac?
He
Yes,
was
Bob.
about to, Abraham was about to sacrifice him.
Right, exactly right. So back at chapter 22 is the whole story of Abraham bringing Isaac to Mount Moriah to offer him there as a sacrifice, and the angel stops Abraham from doing that at the last second. They go down from Mount Moriah, and we don't hear from Isaac again. We hear from Abraham. That Abraham goes with his servants at the end of the chapter, and then we see Abraham burying Sarah, and we see Abraham delegating Eliezer with this mission. We haven't seen Isaac. So the question arises in our mind, where has Isaac been? So the answer is in verse 62 here that I just read, he was coming from the well known as Chayei. And this is bonus. If anybody knows where we last saw this well, what happened at Be'er Chayei? Does anybody know?
That the wells dried up in the desert when Miriam died?
Okay, so that's an interesting idea, Deborah, that it has to do with the well's name that was associated with Miriam. So I wouldn't put it past the Midrash to make a connection like that. But as we're reading a story, Miriam doesn't exist yet, right? So Miriam comes several generations later. But again, I wouldn't put it past the Midrash to make that kind of connection for something that comes later in the story, okay? But I'm thinking of something that came earlier in our story, and that is when Hagar, Sarah's maidservant was Hagar. When Sarah was barren, she insisted that Abraham take her maidservant Hagar and have a child through her, and that child would officially be Sarah's child. And this was something that was common in the ancient Near East. In fact, that the maidservant could serve as a surrogate and not have any control at all over the child born to the surrogate, that it would count as the master's child. Okay, so Hagar does get pregnant and gives birth to a child, and Sarah is jealous of the fact that Hagar was able to conceive so quickly and then to birth a child. She wants to kick Hagar out of the house. So there are two versions of that story. We have that story in chapter 21. We also have that story in chapter 16. And in that story, Hagar runs out of food and water. She puts her son under a bush to protect him from the heat of the sun, and she sees an angel, and the angel has her turn around, and voila, there's a well there. And the well is then named Chayei Roi. What I see brings life to me. Something like that. That's how we can translate, which our Eitz Chaim does not translate the name of the well, but Chayei Roi, like what I see makes me live, something like that. So it has what I see is the oasis. The oasis provides me with nourishment and keeps me alive. That's what Chayei Roi means. But the significance here is that Isaac is at that place. And that place is where Hagar and Ishmael are. And Ishmael is his half-brother. Now, legally, Ishmael is his full brother, right? But Ishmael is born to Hagar, but born to Abraham. So they share a father, Ishmael and Isaac share a father, but they have different mothers. So somehow, for some reason, Isaac goes to that well after the experience at Mount Moriah. And the question is, why? Right? So now that's why I want to share my screen, because for some reason, our Eitz Chaim chooses not to comment on this. But I think this is something that we should question. I mean, if it was a random well that we've never seen before, you could say, okay, it's just a random place that Isaac went. But the fact that it's a well that was named, and we came across it in a story just 3 chapters ago, should raise flags to our careful reading minds, because when we read Torah, we're supposed to be careful about what we read, like read it carefully. And so place names that we've seen before we're supposed to make the connection. And the fact that it's the place name where Hagar and Ishmael were, and Isaac went there, why? Why did he go there and not go home with Abraham? And not go home with Abraham and to see Sarah, because Sarah didn't go to Mount Moriah with Abraham and Isaac. Okay, so that clearly, if we were in the imaginative, creative types, we would create a story that will help understand why Isaac went to Hagar and Ishmael, and he didn't go home with Abraham to meet his mother, to reunite with his mother, Sarah. Now, one idea from the Midrash is that Sarah's dead. So in other words, why does Sarah die immediately after the Mount Moriah story? I mean, that's what happens in the narrative. We have a parenthetical note about Rebecca at the end of chapter 22, just so that we understand Rebecca's genealogy and how she's part of the family. But the story ends of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, with Abraham and his servants going back home and not hearing from Isaac again. We have the parenthetical note of the genealogy, and then Sarah dies. So according to the Midrash, Sarah dies because she knows what Abraham is taking Isaac to do. So just knowing of Abraham's mission with Isaac, that's enough to cause her to die. Okay, so maybe Isaac knows that his mother is dead, and he can't go back with Abraham yet. Or there's got to be something. So let me share my screen and see, share with you these comments. Okay, so I'm going to make this bigger so that we can see. So a great resource for study is a library. And I have many books on my shelf, which, if you can see here now in my screen, I have lots of books in my office. Okay, so the old-fashioned way of studying Torah is to take books off your shelf and to see what the sources have to say. Well, that is so other century. The new thing to do is to go on a website called Sefaria, which I highly recommend. If you're interested in study like this, it is having a Jewish library at your fingertips on the laptop. So as long as you have an internet connection, you have a whole Jewish library at your connection for free. So Sefaria manages to survive with donations. So this is not a plug for Sefaria because I have never made a donation to Sefaria. But the beauty of Sefaria is that you have the foundational text, the Bible, and then as you're reading through the Bible on the website, you just click and then click on the particular verse, and then all of the books on your shelf come up as a menu of what you can look at on that particular verse. Okay? So I'll stop sharing and let me share a screen on Sefaria for you. Just one second. Let me do that.
Is this the secret sauce on where you get your sources for your sermons?
Well, some of it, yes. The other secret sauce is Devar Torah emails that come into my inbox. So just one second here. I just want to get to the page here. One second. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. There it goes. Here it is. Share. Okay, so this I pulled up, you see here, Sefaria on the left here, and I'm on the our place in the Chumash, verse 62. And so I want to show you what happens when I click on our verse. What comes up on the side is this menu. Commentary, there are 50 commentaries on this verse. There are 3 references in the Talmud to this verse. There are 15 references in Midrash to this verse. There are 3 references in the Aramaic translation to this verse. And then when you do more, there's two references in Hasidic literature, one in Musar, ethical literature, and I'm not sure what 6 references are. So I looked at, now I'll stop sharing and then share with you what I did before. Just one second here, please. Okay, I'll get rid of that and go here. Okay, and now I can share again. I'm sorry, I'm talking out loud to myself. And here. Okay, so from Sefaria, I then chose 2 things. First, Rashi is the go-to. So Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, from the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, Germany, 1,000 years ago, is the classic rabbinic commentator to the Torah. What makes him classic is that he comments on almost every verse of the Torah by providing a an essential meaning to the verse and providing the basic midrash, like what the traditional rabbis from 500 years before Rashi's time had to say about the verse. So what Rashi does is explain the verse and also bring to us the traditional rabbinic explanation of the verse, which makes Rashi an essential resource and the most referred to comment when you're studying Torah, and the most translated and most accessible of all the comments. So on Sefaria, Rashi's available in English translation, and his comment is, why is he coming from Be'er Lachai Ro'i? Right, that's the Hebrew reference in the verse. He had just come from the well, Lachai Ro'i. So what was he doing there? For he had gone there to bring Hagar back to Abraham, that he might take her again as his wife. So that's an interesting comment that the rabbis, so the source for this is Genesis Rabbah. That's one of the classic anthologies of Midrash. Midrash, for the sake of explaining the story and teaching moral lessons from the story. That's Midrash Agadah, folklore Midrash, as opposed to Midrash Halacha, Midrash commentary for the sake of deriving Jewish law. So there are anthologies of that kind of Midrash also. So the Midrash for two purposes: Midrash to derive Jewish law, Midrash to derive a moral lesson, which is not legal. And otherwise, it's not part of the Jewish legal system. It's part of Jewish tradition on how to understand the verse and how to understand the story. Okay? So let me just say something more about that, how to understand the story. So our Torah has some, the fancy term lacunae, something's missing from the story, right? Like, why do we only meet Abraham when he's 75 years old? Okay? What happened in the story to make God choose Abraham from among all people he could choose, to choose Abraham and Sarah to be the ones to start the Jewish family? Well, Midrash provides us the background. And not so when we learn the background, it's almost as if that background becomes part of the Torah too. Like when we learn that in Hebrew school or in day school, wherever we had our Jewish education, when we learn the stories about Abraham in his upbringing, then we expect to find those stories then in the Torah itself. And those stories aren't in the Torah. Like the story of Abraham, like his father Terach having an idol shop. And Abraham teaches his father a lesson by chopping down all the idols and putting the axe that he used to chop the idols into the hand of one idol that remained. And Terach comes back. What happened to all the idols? And Abraham said, well, that idol broke all the other idols. Don't you see the axe in that idol's hand? And Terach says, are you kidding? These idols are just stone. And Abraham says, so then why are we worshiping them if they're just stone? Right? So that's the classic story from Midrash that explains the origin of Abraham's monotheism. Okay? Now we expect to find that story in the Torah. It's not there. It's part of Midrash. Okay. So what I say about all that is that there are people within the segments of the Jewish community who see Midrash as just as holy as the Torah itself. And my point is, and I always teach, Midrash, it's important to learn Midrash to understand the Jewish background to the story from the Torah. But that doesn't mean that the creativity and imagination doesn't stop at the end of Midrash, the collections of Midrash. We are entitled to create Midrash today too, okay? So there are some in the Jewish community who wouldn't dare do that, but most of the modern segments of Jewish community understand that study of Torah is in our hands, and we're just as empowered to understand Torah and write stories about the Torah as our ancestors were. Okay, so the Midrash comes to tell us that Isaac knew that his mother was dead, right, based on the previous Midrash that I had shared with you, that Sarah had died when Abraham took Isaac up the mountain. So Isaac, in caring for his father, right, this whole story is about Abraham finding a wife for Isaac. Now, what was Isaac doing? Finding a wife for Abraham, for his father. Okay, so he had the maidservant Hagar, right, and had a child through her, and then kicked her out of the house. Isaac went to convince Hagar to come back home. Now, the connection for this is, right, we're on page 138. Just look at page 139. Chapter 25, verse 1. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. Okay? According to the Midrash, Keturah is another name for Hagar. Now, that's a stretch, but the rabbis say Keturah is none other than Hagar. All right, so what Rashi does by reminding us of the Midrash is that it's thanks to Isaac for bringing Hagar back home, enabling then Abraham and Hagar to fall in love and that's modern, for Abraham to marry Hagar and to find companionship in his old age. Okay, so that's the Midrash. That's what Isaac was doing to help comfort his father. His father in this story was providing a wife for Isaac. Isaac, according to the Midrash, was providing a wife for his father. Okay, but it doesn't answer the question, how does Isaac have a connection still with Hagar and Ishmael? Like, in other words, Abraham kicked Hagar while she was pregnant out of the house. So supposedly, according to the Torah, never saw her again. And we might assume that meant that Isaac never saw them again. But maybe Isaac did see them again. Well, clearly he went to where they were at that well. Did he have a connection with them? Did he maintain a connection with them? So there's a modern collection of Midrash written by women scholars and writers in several editions called Dir Shuni. That is, study me or interpret me. That's what Dir Shuni means in Hebrew. So from the second edition of Dir Shuni, we have, and this is available in Sefaria too. I got it right off of Sefaria. This English translation of what happened here. So let's read this. Abraham returned to his servants. They arose and walked together to Beersheba. Genesis 22:19. That's the end of the coming down Mount Moriah, right? Abraham went to his servants, and they went to Beersheba. So now the Dir Shuni woman scholar, she's not named here in this source. Where did Isaac go? Right? So we don't know where Isaac went in the Torah. So she is suggesting he went to Be'er Lachai Roi. As it says, Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Be'er Lachai Roi, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. Right? That's our verse 62, which we started with a half hour ago. Isaac went and fled, fraught about his father, his mother, and his God, right? The experience at Mount Moriah was traumatic. His father had just tried killing him, and then Abraham stopped. The angel appears to stop Abraham and it calls out Avraham, Avraham. So we don't know if Isaac saw the angel also. We don't know. Okay, it's legitimate to understand from the story two things. Either Isaac saw the angel too, or Isaac didn't see the angel. And all he saw was his father just stop suddenly with the knife in hand and turn around, find a sheep in the bush, and slaughter the sheep instead. The Torah does not say that Abraham's talking to Isaac saying, I'm sorry about this, or say anything to his son. Okay? So it's a traumatic experience. Okay? So in terms of his relationship with his father, and then also his relationship with God. Because what kind of God would cause his father, or why would Abraham believe in a God that would cause Abraham to want to sacrifice his son? So it raises theological, moral questions in Isaac's mind. Okay? How did it happen? Oh, and then his mother also. That maybe, how could his mother allow Abraham to go on this mission? That maybe Isaac assumed that Sarah knew where Abraham was taking Isaac and for what he was going to do with him. So it affected it. So Isaac is in a bad place psychologically, according to this midrash. So how did it happen that he was bound, that they saw fit to do it, and why do it to him? He went to the wilderness, to a place where no man passed or dwelled. They said, no man, but a woman did pass there, and it was Hagar, Be'er Lachai Roi, the well of life's shepherd, Roi. Now, okay, Roi, if you spelled Roi with an ayin instead of an aleph, okay, see how it is here on the top of this page here? Resh Aleph Yud. If you spelled it Resh Ayin Yud, then it would mean my shepherd. Okay, and so that's why the well of life's shepherd, for some reason, this woman who wrote this particular comment is reading Roi with an ayin. And so she's just using tools that the rabbis used in writing midrash. Aleph and ayin can be interchangeable. Other letters, samach and the letter sin, because they sound the same, also interchangeable. And you can change vowels around using the same letters to create new words. All of that are acceptable ways of interpreting words in the Torah. So he went to the place where Hagar lived. Isaac stood at the well until he remembered Ishmael, who had played with him when he was a baby. Now, this author is suggesting that Hagar and Ishmael aren't there anymore. But he remembered that there was a well there, and looking into the well and seeing the water causes him to remember, oh yeah, my stepbrother, my half-brother, and his mother, Hagar, used to be here. He remembered Hagar, who had walked away with a jug of water on her shoulder. However old Isaac was at the time, he remembers his father kicking her out from the house with just a jug of water. Isaac sat there with Hagar and Ishmael, so maybe they were still there, cried with and shared anger with them for many days. So they commiserated with each other about their father. Hagar and Ishmael had anger about Abraham, and Sarah also. Why are you kicking us out of the house to die in the desert? And Isaac commiserating about why his father was about to kill him. One day he stood at the well opening, and behold, the living God, Lachai, the living God saw him. The living God heard his voice in a moment, and Isaac was comforted. So somehow, according to this author, there's a sense of comfort or a feeling of comfort that Isaac attains through an experience with God here at that well. He arose, took Hagar, and brought her back to his father, as it says, Abraham took, it's supposed to say took, sorry, just a second. Abraham took, Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah, right? Which I pointed out already. Keturah is Hagar, whose cries rose like the smoke, Ketoret. Okay, so Keturah on 139, the word that's under the big Kaf Hey, Keturah, yes, comes from the word Ketoret, which does mean smoke. A smoke rising from the altar in the temple in Jerusalem. He also arose and took Ishmael and returned him to his father. As it says, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. Right? Chapter 25, verse 9, Abraham dies, and Isaac and Ishmael bury their father. So it must be that not only did he bring Hagar back home to marry Abraham, but he brought Ishmael back home too, because the two of them were able to bury Abraham. He shall reconcile parents with children and children with their parents, from Malachi chapter 3. This is the whole idea of what God does, reconciling parents and children. That verse, by the way, Malachi 3:24, is from the Haftarah for Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat immediately preceding Passover. Afterwards, Isaac returned to that well and settled there. As it says, after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac settled near Be'er Lachai Roi. Right? And so he went back there in 25:11 after Abraham died, and that's where he sees, he gets consolation in his wife. This is why it is said about him that he redug old wells and brought out of them living water. So we have to know next week's portion, Toldot, in which Isaac digs lots of wells. So this is what this author does. This author, just like Midrash, the rabbis of the Midrash of 1,500 years ago do as well. They try to find connections from different places that will help explain who a particular person is. What do we know about Isaac? We don't know much about Isaac. We know things that are done to him. We don't know things that he does specifically. But we do know from next week's portion that, so we know that he's brought by Abraham to go up to Mount Moriah. We know that he marries Rebekah. That comes up in a couple verses. We know that he buries his father. We know that he marries Rebekah, that Isaac and Rebekah have twin sons, and we know that he has an encounter with the people of Gerar and the king Avimelech, and in leaving the Avimelech's territory, he digs wells and he encounters enmity from people there, and he keeps on digging wells. So this author says, why does he dig wells so much? There must be something about the well that he finds comfort in, that it's an opportunity for him to meditate, to seek solace and comfort. Okay, so I find this to be a beautiful midrash in trying to connect all the dots in a way that things are missing from the story itself. Okay, so if we continue on 138, because I do want to do a little bit more here. So, verse 63. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot arev, vayisa einav vayar vehine gemalim ba'im. So Isaac went out to meditate in the field, and this is the reference, by the way, for the rabbis to understand why we daven the afternoon service every day, mincha. So he lifnot arev, before evening, before dusk. So why was he meditating in the field before dusk? Because Isaac was doing that we understand that we have to pray the mincha service, the afternoon service, every day. So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the source for morning, afternoon, and evening services. So this is the source for mincha from this verse right here. So he is meditating in the field before dusk, and he raises up his eyes and he sees, behold, there are camels coming, approaching. 64, Vatisa Rivka et Eineha, Vatera et Yitzchak, Vatipol me'al hagamal. So Rebecca raises her eyes. So Isaac raises his eyes and sees the camels approaching. Rebecca lifts her eyes and she sees Isaac. Now, the English says she alighted from on top of the camel. Literally, it means she fell off of the camel. So I would say that she didn't fall off the camel. I think it means she quickly got off the camel. Okay, she didn't delicately, ladylike, just need the help of her servants to get down off the camel. She jumped off the camel because she was excited to see him. Okay, so I think that's the upshot of using the word vatipol, falling. 63, vatomer el ha'eved, mi ha'ish halazeh ha'holech basadeh likratenu, vayomer ha'eved hu adoni, vatikach hatza'if vatitkas. So she said to the servant, and this is Eliezer, she says to Eliezer, who's this man who's walking in the field to greet us? And the servant said, he is my master. Now, that could mean he's Abraham, but he means also Abraham's son could also be his master. So he is my master. And she took the veil and was covered, or she covered herself. This is the basis, by the way, for Jewish brides to wear a veil at a wedding. Okay, so we have the whole bedecken ceremony before the ceremony begins, the veiling ceremony. It's based on this, the idea of modesty in the ceremony, modesty in relationship between husband and wife. This is the source for that. 66, Vayesaper ha'eved le'Yitzchak et kol hadvarim asher asa. The Eliezer, the servant, told Isaac all the things that he had done. Right? All 50 verses that came before, Eliezer told Isaac. Okay? So to show Isaac how, not coincidental, but how God had a hand in Eliezer being able to find Rebecca, and Rebecca agreeing to come to be Isaac's wife. Now, 67, this is what I wanted to look at with the other comments that I have on my screen. Vayavieha Yitzchak ha'ohala Sarah imo, vayikach et Rivka v'tehilo le'isha, vaye'ehaveha, vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. So Isaac brought her to the tent of his mother Sarah, Rivka, and he took Rebecca, and made her his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted for his mother. So they're beautiful. This is a comment. This verse 67 and the words in it we don't find frequently in the Torah or the Bible. A psychological comment about a person in the story, right? The psychological motivation or the emotional feelings of the character. So we understand here that Isaac was grieving for his mother. The fact that Rebecca was able to console or comfort him means that he needed comforting. So Rebecca was able to do that. He was able to love Rebecca. We don't have that idea of love mentioned too frequently within the Bible. And the fact that Sarah's tent is still there, right? In other words, after a loved one dies, we might keep their clothing and other things that belong to them around for a while. In fact, I know people who keep the spouse's voice on the voicemail for a while, if not years, to try to maintain the memory of the loved one. So here, her tent is still there, and he dares to bring Rebekah into his mother's tent. So there's a lot of questions about that. So here, I brought 4 comments about this, each one building on the other one. So in the time that we have left, I wanted to look at this. So Rashi, into his mother's tent. He brought her into the tent, and she became exactly like his mother Sarah. So that is to say, the words signify as much as, and he brought her into the tent, and behold, she was Sarah. So in other words, we could read this very, very literally. So if it says, Isaac brought her to the tent, Sarah his mother. So it could mean she brought her into the tent and she became like Sarah his mother. Okay? So now, there could be a lot of Freudian stuff there, but that's not what Rashi is intending. For while Sarah was living, a light had been burning in the tent from one Shabbat eve to the next. There was always a blessing in the dough, that is, that the challah would increase miraculously. There'd be one amount of dough that Sarah would start working with, and miraculously it would create many more challahs than it should have. And a cloud was always hanging over the tent as divine protection. But since her death, all these had stopped. However, when Rebekah came, they reappeared. So that's like his mother Sarah. The blessings that Sarah had brought to the family had stopped when she died, but they resumed when Isaac married Rebekah and brought her home. Okay, so this is the beautiful traditional midrash on the blessings of Sarah and the blessings of Rebekah that she continued. Okay, so that's beautiful. Now this, he also says this, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. It's natural that while a man's mother is living, he is wrapped up in her, but when she dies, he finds comfort in his wife. Okay, so this could be a medieval understanding. It might be a modern understanding too. If we have close relationships with our mother, then if our mother dies, God forbid, then our wife takes our mother's place in terms of providing comfort, support, encouragement, all of that. So beautiful ideas that we don't normally see, and especially in Rashi, and certainly in the rabbinic commentary before, these psychological insights. Now, Nachmanides, who lived 200 or so years after Rashi, studied Rashi, always refers to Rashi in his comment first before then adding his own. He says, the purport of the verse is to tell of the honor that Isaac bestowed upon his mother. For from the time that Sarah died, they did not take down her tent, because they said, let not another woman come into the tent of the honorable mistress. But when he saw Rebekah, he brought her into that tent in her honor, and there he took her as his wife. This is the meaning of the words, and he loved her, and he was comforted, indicating that he was deeply grieved for his mother, finding no comforter until he was comforted by his wife through his love for her. Otherwise, what reason is there for Scripture to mention a man's love for his wife? All right, I don't want to read the rest because time is fleeting. I want to read this comment from the mystical Jewish tradition, the Zohar, the mystical commentary to the Torah. Usually, if I saw a Zohar comment, I would not be able to understand it because mysticism is a different part, requires a different part of the brain that I don't have. But this one is easy to understand. You may object. According to what has been said, a man enjoys greater dignity when he is on a journey than when he is at home, on account of the heavenly partner who is then associated with him. In other words, you might think when you're alone traveling, you have the opportunity without any distractions to have a full-blown connection with God. But when you're at home, you have the distractions of your family, and that prevents having a deep relationship and connection with God. This is not so, for when a man is at home, the foundation of his house is the wife, for it is on account of her that the Shekhinah, divine presence, departs not from the house. In other words, because of the wife, God's presence is in the house. So our teachers have understood the verse, and he brought her to the tent of his mother Sarah to indicate that with Rebekah, the divine presence came to Isaac's house. Okay, so that's a beautiful mystical idea too. How do we have divine presence? When man and wife, husband and wife are partnered. Now, here's another comment from Dirshuni, a different edition of Dirshuni, which is only in Hebrew. Sefaria doesn't have an English translation for it, so allow me to translate as we go. So, Isaac brought her to the tent of Sarah, his mother. Don't read, I'm going to translate instead of reading it first. Don't read to the tent, but rather her God. So, ha-ohala. So if you shift positions of the lamed and the hey, you have God, a name of God, Eloah. So it could be rather the God of Sarah, his mother. He brought her to the God of Sarah, his mother. So that opens up a whole different way of understanding what's happening here. So Sarah used to worship the God of Abraham, her husband, and she would call her God, and she would see that God inside her without having been revealed to Abraham. So, in other words, her God, Sarah's God, is the relationship to God that Sarah had that Abraham didn't have. So Sarah had a unique relationship with God that was internal. And this, her God, was with her in her tent always. And it would comfort her. And therefore, it says in chapter 18, Sarah laughed inside herself. She laughed with the God inside her. Said that the vision of God filled her with happiness, happiness and joy. And when Rivka entered the tent of Sarah, she saw that very same God, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, that was revealed to Sarah. So, in other words, bringing Rebekah into Sarah's tent means here for this Anat Yisraeli who wrote this, that Rebekah was able to see Sarah's vision of God, and Rebekah saw it, and it became her vision of God too. And then immediately her soul cleaved to Isaac's soul, so that in this verse she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted for his mother. So a beautiful idea that not only the divine presence rested above the tent, but this idea that there was a unique relationship that Sarah had with God, and it's that relationship called Eloah, that Rebekah sees and develops herself to. So, wanted to share all these comments with you today to help enhance these few verses on page 138. Any questions or comments about this? Any thoughts? I say yes, Bob.
Just, I thought the bedekin goes back to Jacob and the two.
There's that too, but that's kind of
Okay.
silly, but it is a reason to make sure that you're marrying the right person, right?
Okay.
Because yes, Laban tricked Jacob on his wedding night and brought in Leah instead of Rachel. Yes.
Right.
So but when you're in the midst of the wedding ceremony itself, it seems kind of ridiculous and hokey to bring up that reason as opposed to this reason, which is also there, the idea of what your relationship, husband and wife, wife and wife, what your relationship is going to be like. And modesty, humility should be part of a relationship, right? No one should be more important than the other in the relationship. And the covering with the veil is just a symbol of that modesty and humility. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments?
I thought the Midrash with Abraham and the idols, I thought that was in the Torah.
I told you, see? You're not the only one, Bob. But that's why I pointed out that's how important the way we read a story, it comes, like, in other words, if we're learning about the history of George Washington, we might expect in historical sources the story of him chopping down a cherry tree or throwing the silver dollar across the Potomac. So those are legends. They're not real parts of the story of George Washington's life, right? So the same thing so in other words, folklore, there are stories of Abraham Lincoln. So heroes in the American history develop stories that go with them and might be based on fact and might just be based on the idea of like how we want to enhance the personality, the character of the person, and how much more so we do that with stories of the important people in the Torah, our matriarchs and patriarchs. All right. Have a good day, everybody, and see you all next week for another Torah study.